You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and work experts. We talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at, what they do every day, and what they see coming next for the future of work. Hope you enjoy.
Nicole, how are you doing? Welcome to the Modern People Leader.
Thank you. I am doing great. No complaints on this side, and I am happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, it's been a while since we connected in Boston. Our friends at Kunik were the source of this connection and kind of the genesis of bringing you onto the show. So I'm super excited about our conversation today. The first thing that we start every show with is what we call good news stories. And we all share a personal or work-related story from the past couple weeks, just to kick things off with a little positivity. We like for our guests to go first, but we can step in if you need a moment.
Okay. Well, first let me ask, is there a time limit on this story?
No.
You know, it's been a really interesting summer, to say the least, for me. And I've had an awesome opportunity to really enjoy some downtime over the last 4 or 5 months. One of the things I did probably, I think it was like a week or so ago, was go see a play. So I'm in Connecticut, about 2.5 hours from New York. So going to see a Broadway play is a pretty simple feat. But went to see The Wiz. Are you all familiar with The Wiz? Yeah. Great. One of my favorite all-time plays, all-time movies. And if you know, it's been revived on Broadway. And so I went to see it with my daughter, my mother, and I went a couple weeks ago. Took that 2.5-hour train ride, enjoyed some mommy, daughter time, and really got a chance to lean into the seat and discover how much I love The Wiz. But here's an interesting thing about going to see that play. And I think, you know, for the first time, I was able to see it through a different lens. And I really took the time as I reflected coming back from New York and how some of those characters that we love really align with some of the great things about my family. So I'm a very family-oriented person. So I think about family all the time. And so as I think about the characters, you know, I can pick my husband out, my daughter out, my son out, and really I can pick myself out as I think about this journey of The Wiz. So my husband, I think, is like the lion. So if you know the story, the lion thought he lacked courage. And my husband has been a DJ probably since he was around 9, 12 years old. And he's always wanted to create his own music. But he thought that the industry would not accept him, right? Because he was a little older than typical in the music industry. And we know how ageism can be a thing in the industry. But a couple of years ago, he threw caution to the wind. He decided to pursue his passion of producing and creating music and created his own music as an artist. And since 2023, he's released a couple different songs, all with a lot of success. And again, I think about him and really loosening up what he thought was no courage to courage and doing exactly what he wanted to do. Think about my son, and if I had to put him with the character, it would be probably the Tin Man, right? Because of the Tin Man thought he didn't have a heart. My son has been a basketball player since the wee height, right, of playing basketball. And so his dream, like a lot of kids that play basketball, was to be a professional basketball player. So we did it all. AAU, travel team. I can't tell you what I feel like is millions of dollars on basketball. And so I knew this is what this kid wanted to do. But his luck was a little bit different. Since his senior year in high school, he has sustained 3 ACL injuries. If you know anything about an ACL injury, it could be quite debilitating. Like one every single year since he was a senior. And then he suffered a foot injury. So the writing was kind of on the wall that basketball might not be his long-term thing, but he overcame that, right? He took the heart that was needed to really think about what he needed to do to move forward, how he can pull himself together, go through all of the therapy, and really get back on track. And then figured out, well, if basketball is not going to be the thing that I'm going to do, what can I do that's basketball adjacent? So now he's a grad student at a university that's local here. He's a grad assistant coach, and he is positioning himself to continue with basketball in a little bit of a different way. And then there's my daughter. And I think about her as really the scarecrow who thought he didn't have a brain. So my daughter is a what I call a COVID student from high school. So she was always a good student in high school, but her last, year and a half, she was interrupted with COVID. She stayed home for a year and a half, so graduated not really with all of the experiences that you get from going to high school, including interacting with others and just really learning how to mature. Well, she went to college, wasn't quite what she thought it was going to be, as I think most of the students that went to college during that time didn't, but she has thrived academically, right? She's been on the dean list for 3 years, is a leader in the student organization, and her goal is to graduate with honors in the spring of 2025, and she is on the path to do that. And then, of course, we can't forget about Dorothy. So I really liken my opportunity to Dorothy, where I had a really big career-changing experience earlier this year and often thought about, what am I going to do now? How am I going to align those passions and those skills that I have to really get back on track? Lucky for me, I've had some really cool people in my life who have been supportive and who have showered me with affirmations. And so as I listen to everything that they've shared, I realized that home for me does not have to be a place, somebody else's company. Home for me is really about making sure that I'm having opportunities to really help others find their voice. And no matter where I do that, that is my goal and that is my passion. So I am always home as long as I'm doing those kind of things. So a little bit of a long, good feel story, but for me, it's really about the intersection and reflection and thinking about how my family, who absolutely are core members of who I am and what I do, how their successes really equal my success.
You want to go next, Steven, or you want me to take it?
I'll let you take it.
Well, first of all, so much that I relate to. I'll start with your son's story. So I played basketball all the way through high school. Didn't play college, but I also struggled with knee issues. I tore my ACL, my meniscus. So I'm very familiar with the rehab that goes into recovering from that injury. And yeah, congratulations to your son and going into the coaching world. I have some friends that are basketball coaches, and
Cool.
every once in a while I'm like, oh, what if I would have taken that route? So kind of jealous. And then, shout out to your daughter as well. Lots of good news. Kind of hard to follow that story. For my good news story, I will say the last week or two, I've gotten a lot of energy from some of the upcoming projects that we have at the Modern People Leader. I won't talk about both yet, but one of them is that we announced an event in September. So we're going to do our first in-person live podcast on September 17th here in Austin, Texas. I'm not really sure when this episode's going to publish, but I'm sure it'll go out in advance of the event. If you're listening to this and you haven't gotten your ticket, go get it now. This is something that's brand new for us, and I think that I appreciate taking on new types of work, and I feel like I'm back. It gets a little bit monotonous doing the same thing over and over again, and I needed to change it up a bit. So I'm really excited for some of our upcoming projects, specifically MPL Live.
Ditto. I am also very, very excited. Good news for today is personal. Summertime is just a weird time, especially if you have kids, because you're off kind of the typical process. The great thing about the school year is it's very structured, and it's you're going to bed early because you got to wake up early and you got to do all these things. Summertime is just can be the worst for parents because it's total chaos. You're thrown off your schedule. Someone has to pick people up from camps and this and that. And so this summer has been pretty smooth. The girls are getting older. They're 12 and 14. And that also means that vacations are a little more fun because you're less worried about, your kids face planting or, doing something that could ruin the trip. And now it's just about enjoying the time together and the place you're visiting. And so we are going tomorrow for our official holiday trip to Maine. So we are going to Portland, Maine for a wedding. And we will be going to Acadia National Park and doing some kayaking and hanging out in the nature. And for me, I don't know if it's because I'm from Texas, but Maine, in my head, is one of those places I've always wanted to visit. Just because we read about things in our history books. And it's oh, we don't have that. We don't have seasons in Texas. We don't have this natural beauty. And for some reason, Maine has always stuck out. And I've never been there. And super excited to be going.
So we're excited to have you on the East Coast. Just don't bring all of that bad weather with you. We'll try to keep the humidity down for you to give you a great experience in Maine.
Deal. That's a deal.
Hey everyone, we've got a big update for our event that's coming up on September 17th in Austin, Texas. The amazing Katie Burke will be the fourth and final guest at MPL Live. For those of you that don't know, she's the former CPO at HubSpot and on the boards of Paycor and the Boston Red Sox. And she's an OG MPL guest from a couple of years ago. So it will be her, Jonna Driver, the Chief People Officer at Lattice, David Hanrahan, the Chief People Officer at Flare, and Jessica Zvon, the author of Built for People. And after the live pod, we're going to save 2 hours for networking and hanging out with your fellow HR leaders. Tickets are on sale for $249, but we have a special treat for our podcast listeners. Use our exclusive discount code MPL-Live-50 and snag your ticket for just under $125. If this sounds like something that you want to check out, the link to register is in the show notes. So yeah, grab your ticket today and we will see you in Austin. Well, Nicole, I'm excited to hear your career journey. So I wasn't able to make the prep call with you and Steven, but yeah, I mean, I've taken a look at your LinkedIn and some of the companies you worked for. I mean, SiriusXM, Travelers, worked some very reputable brands, and you've also, had a couple of pivots in your career, and it sounds like you're thinking about making another pivot. Would love to hear about the journey, and then what's next? Like, what do you have in mind?
So again, as I mentioned earlier, it's been quite the summer, and thinking about what's next for me requires me to think back to sort of where I've been, to your question around, my history. So getting into diversity, equity, and inclusion was non-traditional, like it is for most people that are included into this space. So I started off my career in insurance. I am from Connecticut, and at one point, Hartford was the insurance capital of the world. So most of us started our career in insurance. I was no different. And I started off in an operations role, creating contracts, or when you all have healthcare benefits, you get your booklet that tells you everything that you're supposed to get and how it works. Well, I started off doing that kind of work. And again, it was fine. I've always been that kid that's done everything she was supposed to do, including going to the college that was local, getting into insurance, just getting the good job. And so it worked for a couple of years until it didn't. It was I like to say, an opportunity that somebody saw something in me that I didn't quite see in myself at the time. And I had one of the managers at my first organization say to me, "Have you ever thought about training?" And I'm like, I don't know. And then I said, why not? What could be the harm in it? And so I decided to jump on the training bandwagon, and I was a technical trainer doing 12-week new hire training for all folks coming into this operations department. And so that was really my foray into using my voice to help others. Again, it was in a very technical way, but still in a way that really taught people how to do X, Y, and Z. So that was interesting. And I did that for a while. And then I realized that I wanted to do something different. And I wanted to go to a different organization that would allow me to do something different. And that's when I went to Travelers, which really became the beginning of my HR, DE&I training. And so when I went to Travelers, I began in an organization called Organizational Enterprise Leadership and Organizational Development. And there I was a facilitator doing leadership training. So how to be a good leader, how to set up a great meeting, and some of those really tactical leadership development opportunities. And I did that probably for about 6 to 8 months before I realized that HR might just be my thing. And so I decided I wanted to do more within HR. And so I joined what they call the Human Resources Leadership Development Program in the organization. I applied like everybody does, and I decided that was the direction that I wanted to go. What was interesting about me getting into the program is that I was uniquely different than most people that go through that program. It's typically geared for folks that are right out of college, looking to start their first job. I had been working 6+ years. I had already led a team. And so my background was different than most, but I decided, nevertheless, it was something that I wanted to do. I wanted to learn more about HR. So fortunate for me, I got into the program. And at the same time, Travelers was looking to start their first DE&I efforts at the organization. And I raised my hand and I said, ooh, that looks pretty cool. Looks like something that I would love to do. I think I have the skills for it. I certainly have the passion for it. And I know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of some behaviors that, just didn't serve me well. And so I raised my hand. And luckily for me, again, they said, absolutely, you can start with this very new team, very new structure. And oh, by the way, the person that we're bringing in to help lead these efforts is going on maternity leave. I was like, whoa. So this is one of those chances I was like, ooh, raising my hand sounded good at the time. And then I thought, I don't know, this might be a little more than what I anticipated biting off. But it all worked. She was on maternity leave. I was there alone, really trying to understand and get well prepped into what DE&I meant for the organization, or what it was going to mean for the organization since it was new. I absolutely fell in love with DE&I. I knew that I did not want to do anything else at the time. The purpose of the HR leadership development programs are to put you in several HR functions so that you can learn, all pieces of HR. I was good. I was like, nope, I'm good. I want to stay exactly where I am. This is where I'm supposed to be. And again, because of the track record that I had, they were fine with that. And so I sort of had one foot into the program and one foot into being a full-time DE&I practitioner, and it worked for me. Again, fell in love with the function, have been doing DE&I work ever since, through different industries, through different companies. I like to say that, when I think about all of the great things I've done across my career, getting into DE&I has been one of the absolute best risk and career moves I could have ever taken along the way. And so DE&I has been my thing, and I did it at Travelers for many years. At Travelers, I also decided to lead a college recruiting function. There, I needed to I'll say I needed to prove in the organization that I had leadership, people management skills. So I went to college recruiting and led that team for a while, but could not stay away from DE&I and went right back after about 3 years in college recruiting, because again, I knew that's exactly where I wanted to be. And then I said, one risk is not enough. It's time to do something different. And then decided to, go somewhere else to do DE&I work. And that's when I went to Mass General Brigham in Boston. I drove 4.5 hours every single day back and forth to Boston to help lead and implement DE&I again at Mass General Brigham. It was an amazing time. It gave me a great opportunity to learn another industry. While DE&I, the tenets of it are really the same, the industry and the company that you do this work in can vastly change, right, your experiences. And so it was a wonderful opportunity for me to get into a different industry and figure out how you do DE&I in healthcare. And so I did that for a year and a half, 2 years. And then again, it was risk jumped on my shoulder again, and it was time to do something different. And that's when I ended up 2.5 hours in the opposite direction, going to New York City for SiriusXM. And that was probably the pinnacle of my DE&I career, because there is where I led the DE&I strategy and the function, and ultimately helped develop the company's first philanthropic and social impact strategy. So it's been a ride for all rides, and I'm happy to say that I've loved every single minute of it.
So that's the second time I've heard this story. I absolutely love your journey. And there's so many things that I relate to. For me, I specifically remember 2 moments that completely changed my view on diversity and the impact that diversity programs can have on someone's career. And honestly, for me, I was hesitant in the early days of my career to accept any sort of DEI benefit or to participate in a program, because I felt like it was cheating. Obviously, I know that that is ridiculous, because I was chosen by merit to be in a program that the company was committed to and was going to invest in regardless of whether I joined the program or not. And so around my time at Goldman, I started taking things more seriously. And there were 2 things. I was part of a hypo leadership acceleration program. And it just blew my mind that there were literally unspoken rules that were known, but not shared, that not everyone had access to. And I just didn't even know that that was a thing. In my naive mind, I thought, how could that be? The rules are the rules. Everyone should know these nuances, especially when it involves career progression. And one of the things I learned was that at Goldman Sachs, if you do not explicitly say that you want to be a managing director, you will never, ever, 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 ever be considered for promotion to managing director. Like, and I'm sure there are exceptions. I'm sure there's like the all-star trader who's like raining millions of dollars and like, is like proactively sought after. But for the layperson like me, I had to ask, and I did not know that. And I just was like, I remember that was a moment that like totally changed my way of thinking around DEI. The second was a training program that I received a couple of years later on microaggressions. And I felt like revolutionary at the time, but we were being trained on things that we do as people of any underrepresented group that reinforce biases against us. And it was essentially like training us on like, hey, just FYI, these are things that we can do to sabotage that we don't even know it's happening, but it's actually hurting us. And again, it was like, it just blew my mind. And so I'm curious for you and your journey that you just shared with us, can you think of like one or two moments that were just like really shaped the way that you think about the DEI space and the work that you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for sharing those really transparent stories. And your story is very similar to a lot of folks, right? And I want to go back to a couple things in your story a little bit, and then I'll share about some moments in mine. So I think about those unwritten rules and things that seem to be apparent to some and not to others. And being told that if you don't do X, Y, and Z, then you won't get, A, B, and C. Well, there's a lot more complication to that. So yes, we can be told that we can't get X, Y, and Z without getting A, B, and C. But we have to think about those cultural nuances that really, for some of us, bump up against us going after X, Y, and Z to get A, B, and C. And so it's interesting to think about, culture and how things are laid out in culture, who has the information and who doesn't. All of those are parts of a larger DE&I conversation. It's not just about race and gender and some of the things we typically talk about. It's about access to information. And so at the point that we all get access to information, then we're all at a place where we can be evaluated the same way. The challenge is that not all of us start in the same space, right? And so kudos to you for being reflective of those things that really made a difference for you as you talk about, your experiences with DE&I. For me, it's been a lot of things, right? So I remember very clearly being the only woman in a room full of all men. I remember very clearly being the only person of color in a room full of people that did not look like me. I remember very clearly being the youngest. So I was a part of a team. I love this team. They were phenomenal, much, much older than I was and had a lot more experience. And I was the youngest. I remember what it felt like to be the youngest and to be afraid to speak my truth. So all of those things have really shaped how I think about DE&I and how I really try very hard to create situations where people can bring all of that. And I won't say not be afraid, because I think there's nothing wrong with fear, but to feel like I can take the risk to say what I need to say, to do what I need to do, and it'll be okay. That's really what I strive to do. And so, being the only one, being one of very few shapes all of our experiences if we've been in those situations. As I think back, not just on race, not just on gender, I'll share a little bit of example around hair, which is pretty interesting as well. So I know the audience can't see me, but you can see me and you see that I have short hair. Before having short hair, I had really long locks. Some people call them dreadlocks. I call them locks. There's a lot of different names for it. And so I had been growing my locks for years and loved my locks. I thought I was beautiful and looked very chic. And I had someone say to me, do you think the fact that you have locks is really stunting your ability to grow? I was shocked. I don't know why I was shocked, but I was. And I'm
shocked hearing. I felt uncomfortable literally hearing you say that.
So, and it's like, really, my hair? And so, for those of us that have many dimensions of diversity that might not be the majority in whatever spaces we're in, it starts to get a lot more complex when we start layering all this other stuff in it, like hair, right? And so that took me aback. I did not know what to do with that. And so I had to say to myself, there are so many microaggressions and barriers swimming in these pools, right, of companies. How do we start to break that down? How do we start to bring light to that and show people that these things are happening, whether you want to believe it or not, whether it's happened to you or not? They are happening every single day. And that's why I make it my mission to really do this work from a place of personal experience, from a place of conviction, because I don't want people to have to feel like I felt. I know that if that ever happens, then I would work myself out of ever having another job in DEI. But really, the goal is to make sure, again, people just can show up and not have all of these extra barriers that at the end of the day speak nothing to my ability, speak nothing to my education, speak nothing to really what makes me me and makes me an effective person to do and get a job done.
And so I want to bring back a segment that we've had on the show before. It's been a while, and we call it the State of the Union for work. Today, we're going to switch it up a little bit. We're going to call it the State of the Union for DEI.
Okay.
And I have a few questions for you. So I guess is impossible to ignore is that DEI has been pretty politicized over the last couple of years. So much so to where, like a blanket, I feel like people just blame DEI for everything without even really knowing what it means. I hear it all the time. Like, oh, it's because of that dang DEI. And a lot of the times I want to like ask the person, what do you mean by that? Like, do you even know what DEI means? Because I feel like people think they know what it means, but they don't really. I guess my first question, what is your response to the statement that DEI is going away?
Oh, such a loaded question. So the short answer is I do not think DE&I as a concept, as a philosophy, is necessarily going away. What I do think is that the language that we use to describe it, these terms that have become like hot buttons politically in companies throughout, the country, those things are changing and shifting and perhaps going away. I cannot bring myself to believe that it's going away. And so I'll never say that, right? Because I can't bring myself to say that because I know how important the work is. I am a full believer that you have to meet people where they are. And so while I am sad that we have to lose language that many of us took years to get people to understand, right? So if I think back to training years ago, we spent a lot of time just getting people to understand what DE and I means. And so the fact that we have to sort of move away from that or shift the conversation around that language does sadden me a lot. But again, things change. And so how do we meet people, where they are? What really does bother me, I think, more than anything is not that the language is changing specifically, but that some are feeling as though the rigor that's required from a DE&I perspective, and rigor meaning having somebody responsible for the function, for the strategy, for moving things through the organization is no longer needed. That we're in a space where, it's just going to happen. It is ingrained in everything we do. Well, DEI is a journey. And for companies who just started this journey 3 or 4 years ago, you're not there. You're not even close to there. And so to not have folks that are dedicated to thinking about it or not training people up to think about it in their everyday, I think is a sad place to be. And so we will continue to need to do DE&I because we know that diversity at all elements, all diversity dimensions are not honored and celebrated, right, in workspaces. We know that there is not equity in all situations and there's work to do there. And we know that from an inclusion perspective, that there's a lot of work to do. Inclusion is absolutely about everybody. It's about everybody, but it also means understanding the experiences and the journeys of folks that maybe you did not ever spend time thinking about. And that's how we build inclusion. So not going away, talking about it a little bit differently, perhaps, but it cannot go away because we are not done with the work that needs to get done in this space.
I would be remiss, or let me rephrase that. I think it would be impossible for us to avoid the recent news of SHRM on this topic, SHRM removing the E from DEI.
Mm-hmm.
And we, I don't want to have a sensational conversation. I think if people are looking for that, just go to your LinkedIn feed. It's probably, this is going to be published probably a month or two after the fact.
Yeah.
But that was last week, in recording time. I just want to talk about reactions. Daniel and I, this is our business, right? Our business, we are a media company that focuses on HR. And regardless of what the reality of like the news media is like today or whatever, we really do try to stick to the lane that we've defined. And we choose to be, unless it's something that is like totally violating our values, we try to like keep an open mind, i.e. we try to see all sides to the conversation or to the argument. And, when the news was, or the link had not even hit my personal news feed before I saw the LinkedIn post, and the posts that I saw were generally anger, like crazy anger. I'm using these words as a person that is, I feel that I intersect with a lot of dimensions of diversity that you spoke of. There was anger. There was like requests to cancel SHRM. There literally imagery of burning the house down. Like, and then I saw a post of a former Modern People Leader guest. Her name is Angela Shaw. She's extremely well respected in Austin. I think she was at one point, she's BIPOC, and she was once, I think, like the president of the local chapter of SHRM. And her post was the complete opposite. It was sadness. It was like empathy. Like, I know what you were trying to do, but like, guys, you got this totally wrong. And it was a call to action to focus on impacting through change, not getting caught up with the, sensational aspect of what the decision was made. And so I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts and like how this is being, I guess, perceived by our community? And, kind of what's your take on the matter, if you're willing to share?
I am. This is another topic. Listen, it's the summertime and things are roasting everywhere. So I like to take a balanced approach whenever possible, right? I'm always looking for the win-win. What's the benefits on all sides? And I'm always a glass half full versus a glass half empty. This one, I can go either way, to be perfectly honest with you. I also saw the outrage from the community around SHRM's stance, and people wanted to cancel. And again, we're in this big cancel culture, so I'm not surprised that it went there. And then I also saw a couple things where people were supportive and thought that removing E was more about strategy. Here's the challenge, and this is Nicole's perspective and only mine. In a culture where everything is so sensationalized, given this time in our country, I just think was now the time to add what I'm calling fuel to this whole fire and debate around DE&I. And I'm not saying that the debate should not happen. I just think we get caught up, right? And I don't know SHRM's motives. I'm not on their leadership team. I've done a little bit of reading to sort of understand what they're saying, but I can't pretend to be behind, right, all of the conversations behind the door. I just wish that maybe from a timing perspective, there could have been another way to push out that message. As I said before, D, E, and I as a concept, as an individual components of it, holistically, D&I cannot go away. Again, I don't care what we call it ultimately. The tenets of it have to stay in place in order for folks, no matter where they fall along the dimensions of diversity, no matter their intersections from a dimensions of diversity perspective, have to feel confident that they can rely on those tenets to feel good about who they are, what they bring, and be allowed to have barriers removed for them to thrive in their organization. Equity for me is critical. It's important. I don't think you can get rid of it. I don't even know what else you call it. Removing it, and I think when I read around SHRM, they were sort of tucking the equity under inclusion. So you're going to still do the equity work, I hope. How you tuck it, how you disguise it, may not matter in the end. I just want to see evidence that the work is still happening. So I'm really going to hold my judgment for now on whether they should have or should not have. And I'm looking for the evidence. Listen, DE&I is about evidence. We have a lot of things we talk about philosophically. A lot of things can be perceived as touchy and feely, but there's evidence, there's data that points to whether things are successful. So I am going to wait on the evidence from SHRM around them continuing to move along this path of equity. And then I'll lean in. And so maybe I'll become one of those folks that signed the petition. Or maybe I'll just say, you know what, that was a brilliant strategic move, and I'm going to lean in. But I'm just going to reserve sort of how I feel until I look for evidence. I don't want to get caught up in sort of the flavor of the moment. I just want to be able to make sure that we do enough digging, have enough research, do enough conversing to make sure that we land on something that makes sense.
I remember when I joined my first job in HR in the year 2000, I remember there was one letter and it was diversity.
Yeah.
And this isn't the first time like the verbiage used to describe the construct has changed, right? For whatever reason. And if this is positioning and this is like an issue with, sponsors of SHRM or funding or whatever, aligning to appease the dollars, like this isn't the first time this has happened. The first time I remember it happening was when we added the I. And the reason we added the I, and the I is definitely part of this. I agree with you. But the reason that we added the I is because we realize as practitioners that so long as this was just a conversation about diversity, about like the traditional aspects of diversity, color or race, the color of our skin, age, etc., that we weren't going to be able to move forward. So we added the I, which I think is part of the deal, because it allowed us to have a more general conversation about the topic. And the omission of E, I see, it could be part of it, right? That could be a way of they're saying, look, by having that E in there right now, it's actually hurting our ability to progress. I don't know. I don't agree with that. The change. I can't believe that a comms person or the PR team at SHRM didn't realize, like the bigger issue to me is like, I don't have a lot of confidence in an organization that doesn't have like basic comms and PR reviews on what they're posting. It's just shocking to me. But, to your point, because I've seen a lot happen in the space, I can be open-minded and I can, show a little empathy for the folks at SHRM if that's in fact one of the reasons why they made the decision. But I agree. I think, we live in a sensational world, and part of this is a function of where we are as a society today. But I love the comment that we need to focus on the work that's being done. We need to focus on the fact that this is a construct that has to be here, and what we call it isn't the issue. The bigger issue in 25 years that I've been doing this is we have made marginal progress at best.
Absolutely.
It's still lip service, in my opinion. And so why aren't we talking about that? Why aren't we talking about the fact that not a whole lot has changed?
Absolutely. We always talk about, for those of us that do that work, right, that it's a journey. It absolutely is a journey. But to your point, we've made little change in many aspects of what this work is really all about. But the other thing I like to think about is that DE&I, just as a function and as a construct under HR conversations, is limited. And so I think, again, why I say meet people where they are, we have to figure out all of the ways to connect people to what we're really talking about. The business case, to me, is the business case, right? We've been talking about the business case forever. But I think what we miss is that it has to be the business case, which is the data piece of it for those that like data and hardcore facts. But we can't miss the heart conversation. And the heart piece of the conversation is really what's going to stick, is what's going to make people see something different, what will make people take the time to really say, you know what, I never thought about it that way. I'm going to take the time to talk to Daniel. I'm going to take the time to talk to Stephen to try to understand their perspective. And we have not built in time to do that. We have not built in structures that allow people to really have those authentic and transparent conversations, not with trying to convince each other what their perspective should be, but just to listen with an open mind, without judgment, and to think, could I have done something differently? Could I be thinking about this differently? And how do I make sure that my colleagues, who I have to see sometimes more hours in a day than my own family, how can I make sure that we make this something where we all can be happy and we can all thrive? And I won't say despite our differences, because I did think differences matter and we ought to recognize differences and celebrate differences. But how do we do that all together is really, really important. And it's tough. And it's hard. Hence why we've been talking about this for 25 years. And why we will probably continue to talk about it for another 25 years. And it is cyclical. Things go up and down. Language has changed. Letters have been added. Now letters are going away. And so what's the core of the work, though? And how do we get the work done? And how do we make sure leaders and companies don't downplay the work and say, oh yeah, it's built in everything that we do and we're just going to make it happen? Because we've been trying to help people for 25 years and it has not worked. So why think that you can remove functions and teams and it's just going to happen? It is not. It is not just going to happen. And so I can't wait to see this cycle come back to the point where, companies understand the value of having people dedicated. If it's important, you have leaders, you have a team, you have resources to make it happen. And so, I think companies have to take a hard look at where they are, where they started this journey. Listen, I'm always very transparent. And I will say that many companies started their journey right after the killing of George Floyd. And a lot of those same companies are now backing off. So how serious were you to begin with is really the question. And for everybody that's looking at their company and where they are now, you should be asking those questions if this is important to you. If you are someone looking for an opportunity like me, I will be asking those questions. How important is this work and what is the evidence that is important for you? What have you done? I'm not going to ask about all of your data progress notes because, again, data can be used for whatever you want it to be used for. I'm looking for some evidence. Are people happy? Are people staying? Are people growing? Are they developing? And so we have some hard questions that we have to continue to ask. And so I hope people continue with the courage to do that despite where we are right now in this political hodgepodge of what I like to call a mess. And that's Nicole's perspective.
And I guess one last question related to, like the political environment and the fact that we are coming up on an election. And yeah, just in the last 7 days, some pretty crazy stuff has happened. And I feel like that's just giving us a little preview of what's to come in the chaos of the election here in a few months. I'm just curious, as a DEI leader, what responsibility, if any, do you have in, I can't remember how you put it, but basically making it to where people can coexist and be happy working with one another, even if they have vastly different views? What responsibility does a DEI leader have? And then what, if so, what are some things they should be doing to bridge that gap?
So, as I mentioned, I'm a firm believer in dialogue. And I fully believe that a conversation can take us so far to the path of understanding, to a path of empathy, to really increasing our own awareness of what we might have as personal biases and what somebody else might have as a bias. And so I think particularly in this time, we've got to make sure that we are helping organizations, helping employees feel like they can have the dialogue, a dialogue that is respectful. That is the key, right? A dialogue that is respectful. And it's tough because everything around us is really, I say it's very black or white. It's either you believe it or you don't. It's either right or wrong. And so how do we create organizations that are open for the fact that it could be both things? It could be that my thought about what it is exactly what I'm thinking because of my experiences, and vice versa. So I think conversations are key in the platform that organizations can create to create that dialogue. Again, respectful dialogue, because not all dialogue is good dialogue, but respectful dialogue is really where we need to go. And through that, then folks can learn more about each other's perspectives, and again, can make their own decisions about if the sharing of that person's perspective changes anything about how you think. It is not a requirement that you change. We can't force people to change, but we can give them through dialogue and platforms for dialogue an opportunity to build in some more information that might just get them to think a little bit differently. So from a DE&I leader perspective, I think it's us helping cultivate that fertile ground for those respectful conversations. But it can't just stop with the DE&I leader. All DE&I leaders know that we do not do this work alone, that we have to have the buy-in, the support, the demonstration of commitment from everybody in the organization, from frontline workers to leaders to executives. Everybody has to buy in to this notion that we can have respectful dialogue. We can agree to disagree and still be good colleagues for one another. And so I say, don't shy away from dialogue. It can be tough. Many of us remember back in the day where we couldn't talk about religion, we couldn't talk about politics, like there were a lot of taboo conversations. Well, those days are gone. When we say people should bring their whole self to work, that means everything, right? Their ideology, their political perspectives, their religion, they're bringing all of it. And so we can't ignore it if in fact we're saying bring your whole self to work. So create that space for people to have respectful dialogue, leverage leaders. Again, it can't just be HR facilitating or DE&I. Give leaders tools where they can help facilitate some of those respectful conversations. Use your ERG leaders. Many of them are people managers or leaders in their own right. Have them help you, right? Build that army of people that can go forth and again, really be advocates and allies for respectful conversation. And then just remember that there are mechanisms and benefits in place and that folks will need more than just dialogue. They might need a safe space to do some healing on their own. So what mechanism, what benefits can you put in place to support employees throughout whatever journey, no matter where they are on their journey, around dealing and managing with everything that we have going on? And again, it's everybody's business. And so we have to build those spaces where conversation becomes the priority, and the outcome is not you see it my way or not. The outcome is greater understanding for one another. And I think that's how we do it. It sounds a lot simpler than it is. Again, we've been doing this for 25 years, but I believe in it. And I think that's exactly what we need to do.
I think that is the most eloquent response that we've had to that question, because you're not the first person that we've asked that. And no one seems to want to touch, the handling of social matters in the workplace. Like, we just rarely get such a full answer to that question. And so thank you. I love that. I love what you just shared. And also, like, my mind is blown that almost an hour has gone by and we only got through one of the lines of questioning that we want to get through. And so in the interest of time, I'm just going to ask one last question, still on the topic of, the state of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And earlier I made the comment, and I won't say 25 years, I'll say 20 years, because in 2005, I was part of this task force to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. Back then, we just called it diversity. And to look at the data and put forth recommendations. And so I remember very clearly where we were at from a data standpoint in, 20 years ago in 2005. If you generally look at the data today, it hasn't changed all that much. Like, some things, and yeah, you can zero in, you can cut data however you want to tell a positive story. But if we look just macro level, I would argue that we haven't made the impact that we need to make in this area. And so the question is, like, are we looking at this wrong? Is there like a next evolution of thinking, or do we need to be more creative or maybe more bold in the way that we tackle these problems in the workplace?
Oh, that's a great question. And I'm going to start with what I think is going to be even more important in how we look at this work, how we move forward as a country, if I can take it that macro, and as companies. And I'll go back to what I shared earlier about the whiz and the lion and having courage. I cannot underscore enough how courage is going to be the wind beneath our wings as we continue to move forward in these organizations and as a country. We have got to have the courage to assess where we are in this space, look at 20, 25 years of data, see where we are, the courage to bring outsiders inside to our organizations to give us perspective that we might not have. I've worked at companies where they thought nobody can do it like us. Well, guess what? Your thinking is going to be linear because you all have been working at the company for however many years, so you're going to think alike. So bringing people inside the organization from outside takes courage, and we have to have the fortitude and the courage to do that. We have to have the courage to really make sure that we are holding our leaders accountable, not for changing, 200 years, but for looking at what they can do within their organization to make change. We can hold them accountable for that. You hold leaders accountable for making their sales numbers. You hold leaders accountable for, those campaigns and whether or not they're reaching, the intended stakeholders. You can hold leaders accountable for making change within their group, one group at a time. I know thinking about a large company can be big and audacious and can be scary, but we all have influences, right? We have circles of influence. And so how do we make change within that circle? And we have to have the courage to hold people accountable for that, despite any kind of backlash. We also have the courage to, and this is where I think we're going back into that very HR focused aspect of DE&I. We have to have the courage to keep it out of there. I'm an HR professional, so I understand clearly the importance of DE&I from an HR perspective. But we as DE&I leaders have to start talking about the non-HR impacts for this work. Get in there, understand the business, have your business acumen on 12 so that you can make the proper, suggestions to business leaders about how DE&I can support what they're trying to do from a goal perspective. So we have to have courage there. And then finally, we cannot forget, and I said this earlier, that diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging, whatever other language we want to use, is a head and a heart effort. Let's not be afraid to get to the heart piece, because in my opinion, that's the piece that will make the difference in understanding, in empathy, and changing behaviors. So where is our courage to do all of that and then some? Listen, I'm not silly enough to think this is going to happen overnight. Again, we've been down that road years, but we can't take our foot off the gas, and we have to have the courage to continue to drive. Even though folks are questioning the essence of what we do, we have to continue to drive. And so I'm going to be a lion, and I'm going to have as much courage as I need to, and I implore all of my other DE&I executives, leaders, people on the teams, just leaders, to be a lion and have some dang on courage, because that's what we need in our companies and as a country.
Be a lion. I love it. Before we move to rapid fire questions, can you just tell us what's next for you? What are you looking for? So if somebody's listening to this podcast and looking for somebody to do what you want to do, what is it that you want to do?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I love this space of DE&I. I am not so wed to the language that we use. I can get past that, but I want to be in an organization that believes wholeheartedly in the benefit of this work. And so I am looking to continue to be a leader in DE&I. I also love social impact because I think they're tied. Philanthropy, I think, is all tied together, and we can do good work with that. And so want to combine all of that. I have that experience as well. And so I want to pull all of those things together to have the conversations that matter. I'm not afraid, again, to have a little courage and to speak up and to push. I also have the business acumen, though, to know when to step back, right? And so you got to be able to balance both. But I'm looking for an organization that believes in this work. And so looking to lead again and to build strategy and to be effective for any organization that's looking to do more in this space.
Maybe you'll have something lined up by the time this comes out. But if not, if you're listening to this podcast and you're looking for somebody like Nicole, definitely reach out. Okay, so let's move to rapid fire questions. These are the same 4 questions that we ask every guest, and we try to do it quickly, but sometimes we don't. Question 1, if you could go back in time and talk to a 22-year-old you, what career advice would you give yourself and why?
So don't be afraid, right? I mentioned that I was that kid that always did exactly what I was supposed to do. I would encourage myself to take more risk. Without risk, there is no reward. And so put to the side what everybody else is telling you you must do and do what feels right for you. Listen to your gut. And like the lottery says, you can't win if you don't play.
I'm up next. We'll take care of that long pause. Sorry. We used to go through these all at once and then we started handing them back and forth. So that's my bad. Next question. If you could fix any HR people problem with a magic wand, what would it be and why?
Ooh, magic wand. I think I would focus on leaders and really giving them what they need to be inclusive leaders. We all know the saying that people don't lead companies, they lead their manager. And so if we equip leaders to be inclusive, right? To think about biases, their own first, because you got to start with self, to be intelligent from a cultural perspective, to be collaborative, to really lean into curiosity and listen to their employees. I think we get much further. So I would take my wand and I would make sure all leaders were inclusive leaders.
All right, next rapid fire question. When you look around the corner to the end of 2024 and beyond, what do you see coming next for the future of work?
At the end of 2024, there's a couple things I think I want to share. And I'll start with mental health, right, as a core tenet of what we need to focus on for employee well-being. I think that more than anything is what our organizations will need. And that's where I think DE&I can play a big part in helping companies understand that mental health as a dimension is critical. Our lives are not getting any easier. In fact, they're getting scarier and contentious every single day. And so what can companies do to support their employees? Support, benefits, again, allowing people to take time off when they're mentally drained. I think it's going to be an important piece and could make the difference between somebody deciding to come to your company or not. So thinking about benefits, technology will always change, and so AI will continue to play a role. I would love to see us think about how bias plays in AI and do a little more digging around that. And then thinking about tenure of employees. They're getting shorter and shorter. And so what will companies do to really make sure they're prepared and that they're okay with turnover being as quick as it's been lately, and that being okay. And so just a couple things I think we need to be aware of as we go towards the end of 2024.
Love all of those. And so the last question is, who should we bring on to the show next? Like, we've been very fortunate through the NPL community. We've had a lot of great referrals. You were referred to us by our friends at Kunik. And so curious, like, if you think of like a people leader who's just like really shaking things up, not necessarily in the DEI or elsewhere, like, who do you think we need to give a platform to?
Well, I am going to take us back to SHRM because I would love to hear what Johnny C. Taylor has been thinking about as it relates to removing E. So if you all can make that happen, we'll have a ton of, I think, audience people there watching, trying to understand it. So I think he would be perfect as an guest. I don't know him personally, so I can't hook you up with that, but I think he would be a great guest.
Love it. And so that gets us to...
Oh yeah, go for it.
Go ahead.
I was just say last question, and this is the way that we end every show. It's called one word or phrase closed. So we all respond with a word or a phrase from the episode, just like to put a stamp on it. It could be anything.
I talk a lot about legacy. I am a firm believer in making a place better or making interactions with people better than they were before you actually engaged. And so legacy is the thing that I lean on all the time. And for me, legacy is really about, taking some unprecedented actions that are layered in conviction and commitment and courage, specifically during unprecedented times. So legacy. What are we doing to build our legacy?
I'm going to say be a lion.
I love it. Be a lion.
And I'm going to go with courage, because that was another key element from this conversation. And so, Nicole, we're way over time, but this has been an absolute joy. Thank you for bringing a courageous perspective. Thank you for allowing us to throw you some curveballs. Mm-hmm. And thanks for just a beautiful conversation. I really enjoyed this one. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. Love meeting you, Stephen. And so thank you. It's been great.
Now you're a part of our community, and a
Yes.
lot of our guests have come back for later shows. And hopefully, if you're open to that, we can bring you back at some point.
Absolutely. So Daniel and Stephen, we are now brothers and sisters.
We are.
So
Yes.
I love family. So thank you. I'm now a member of the family.
You're part of the fam.
Yeah.
All right.
Alrighty.
All right.
Well,
Thank
thanks again.
you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Modern People Leader. We really, really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to us. And connect with us on LinkedIn. We want to know what you think about the show, and you can find links to both of our profiles in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.